Are modern Doom games actually getting harder, or did id Software perfect the formula in 2016 and spend the next 2 games trying to reinvent hell with increasingly aggressive management problems? That's the question I wanted to answer. And difficulty is the hook here, because across Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and Doom the Dark Ages, the series keeps finding new ways and creative ways to kill you. Sometimes it kills you because you hesitated. Holy. No way. Sometimes it kills you because you forgot which cooldown feeds which resource. No, are you fucking kidding me? Oh my god, I literally had him down to 1 hit. Sometimes it kills you because 12 demons, a shield parry, a flamethrower, an empty shotgun, and your own terrible positioning all arrived at the same crime scene. Shit. Fuck. So I played through all 3 modern Doom campaigns and tracked every single death. And the more I played, the more the question changed, because the real debate is not only which Doom game killed me the most, it's whether the series actually became better as it became more complex. Doom 2016 brought the series back with one of the cleanest shooter combat loops ever made. It was fast, brutal, readable, and simple in the best way. You moved forward, killed demons, and managed ammo just enough to stay awake and solve most problems by becoming the most violent thing in the room. Then, Doom Eternal took that formula and turned it into a demonic plate-spinning exam where every weapon, cooldown, weak point, chainsaw, flame belch, dash, jump, glory kill, and panic decision had to happen before your brain could recognize you should file a formal overwhelm complaint. And then, Doom the Dark Ages changed the rhythm again. It pulls the Slayer back in the timeline, drops him into a medieval war against Hell, and gives him a shield saw, a dragon, a giant mech, and asks a very different question from Eternal. What happens when Doom becomes heavier, wider, slower, and more brutal? Because difficulty in Doom is weird. Doom 2016 is hard because it punishes hesitation. Doom Eternal is hard because it turns combat into homework with explosions. Doom the Dark Ages is hard because it plants you in the middle of a war zone and expects you to block, parry, push forward, and survive arenas that look like Hell opened a medieval theme park with no safety inspections. But this video is about more than which game killed me the most. It's about whether Doom 2016 still has the most timeless version of modern formulas. And it's about whether Eternal's extra complexity made the combat better or made it louder. And it's also about whether Doom the Dark Ages proves Doom can still evolve by making the Slayer feel less like a pinball and more like a walking siege weapon with anger management issues. So, we're going campaign by campaign, mission by mission, and death by death to answer the real question: which modern Doom game is actually the hardest? Which one holds up the best? And did Doom evolve across these 3 games? Or did the series keep trying to escape a formula it may have already perfected? So with that, let's rip and tear into it. But Doom 2016, this is a game about a corporation digging into hell, finding infinite energy, and somehow deciding that the screaming was probably fine as long as quarterly projections stay strong. You start as the Doom Slayer chained in the UAC facility on Mars, waking up during the kind of workplace incident that would make OSHA quit before 9:30. From there, the campaign escalates from a contained disaster into a full collapse of the UAC, return to hell, and the reveal that the Slayer is less of a soldier and more of an ancient demonic extinction event with hands. Every mission pushes the same question harder. Is the game difficult because the enemies are overwhelming, or because Doom 2016 refuses to reward scared, slow play? Now, I know pretty much nobody is playing Doom for the story, but I'll highlight some of the story as I recap each mission anyway. Mission 1, the UAC. As I said, the game kicks off with us waking up in the UAC facility on Mars, and action starts right away. This is the game teaching us the Doom Slayer does not need a briefing to understand the problem. It's simple. There are demons, he doesn't like demons, so he kills all the demons. He does it in the most reliable way he knows how, which is ripping them apart. After which we promptly collect our battlesuit and are off to kill more demons. Samuel Hayden immediately tries to frame the disaster as complicated, which tells us the UAC has been managing hell like a risky business unit with poor employee retention. The mission reveals the core conflict fast. The UAC wanted Argent energy, Olivia Pierce opened the door too far, and Mars has become the receipt of every bad decision. The Slayer's silence gives the opening a sharper edge because every monitor, corpse, and demonic symbol tells us he already knows enough. By the end, Hayden admits the invasion was worth the risk, and the Slayer smashing the monitor becomes the campaign's first real character statement. Doom 2016 begins by making the plot simple: stop the demons. Then it uses that simplicity to expose something bigger. The demons are the threat, but the UAC helped build the disaster. Death count. 2 deaths is fair for an opening number. It's essentially the mission that is teaching us aggression more than testing mastery. The UAC gives you enough pressure to prove that standing still is a terrible life plan, but the encounters are readable enough that the game is clearly onboarding the player to its rhythm. The mission is basically Doom handing you a shotgun and saying, congratulations, your health plan is violence. So far, not so different from some of the first missions of Halo, so who knows, maybe this game is going to run neck and neck with that series. Mission 2, Resource Operations. Resource Operations expands the opening from a contained outbreak into a full UAC system failure. We move deeper into the Mars facility, and the mission shows how much of the base was built around turning hell into infrastructure. Samuel Hayden continues guiding us, but every line from him carries the same problem. He understands the damage, and he still sounds like a man trying to protect the project that caused it. Essentially, our goal this mission is to restore power to the facility and reposition a satellite dish. Of course, right when we are about to, Samuel Hayden redirects us by blocking our access. This is where we get redirected to Vega. Vega adds another layer by giving the mission a colder, more controlled voice, which makes the chaos around us feel even more absurd. The UAC propaganda also starts sharpening the joke because the company treats demonic invasion like a workplace communication issue with flamethrowers. The mission reveals that Olivia Pierce's betrayal is tied directly to Argent Energy, which turns the invasion from random disaster into the result of obsession, ambition, and corporate denial. By the end, we have more tools, more context, and a clearer target, but the facility is already collapsing faster than Hayden can explain it away. Resource Operations pushes the campaign from waking up angry into understanding exactly who opened the door and who kept pretending the door was worth it. Death count. 6 deaths. This is showing the campaign is starting to apply real pressure without fully taking the gloves off. Resource Operations is still early, but the arenas are wider, the enemy groups are more layered, and the game starts rewarding weapon switching, movement, and fast target decisions. The mission makes us prove we learned the first rule of Doom. Standing still is just pre-ordering your own funeral. Compared with the UAC, this death count suggests a noticeable step up in pacing and encounter density. The game is still readable though, but it's already teaching that power in Doom comes from momentum, aggression, and staying just barely ahead of the swarm. Mission 3, Foundry. Foundry turns the invasion into an engineering disaster that is actively tearing Mars apart. With Olivia Pierce identified as the cause of the outbreak, the Slayer is sent into the UAC Foundry. Not only is it overrun with demons, but it is half past due a disastrous meltdown, so our mission is to stop the reactor from going critical. The level shows the physical cost of Argent Energy through molten metal, burning machinery, dead workers, broken systems, and a facility that feels like it's already unsafe before hell got involved. Samuel Hayden still frames the situation through containment and recovery, which makes him feel less like a rescuer and more like the executive who wants the building saved because the equipment was expensive. The mission also sharpens Olivia's role because the disaster now has direction and the campaign has a clearer villain behind the demonic flood. Foundry works as the first real proof that the UAC built its miracle energy system on top of something it could never fully control. We are still solving every problem with violence, but the mission makes that violence feel like the only honest response in a facility buried under corporate denial. By the end, Mars feels less like a base under attack and more like a crime scene with better lighting and worse plumbing. This mission is where the demons we encounter start becoming more extreme as Hell Knights and Hellraisers are introduced. Death count, 7 deaths. Foundry keeps the early campaign readable, but the arenas again are larger, the hazards are nastier, and the enemy's mix starts asking for faster reactions. This is where Doom begins testing whether you can manage movement, target priority, resource pickups, and awareness at the same time. The Hell Knight introduction gives the mission a stronger bite because it adds a larger threat that can close distance fast and punish panic. The demons are starting to push back, but not in a way that creates a full-blown wall of difficulty. Essentially, Foundry feels like the demons are checking out paperwork before letting us into the real disaster, and because this is Doom, our paperwork is filled out in blood. Mission 4, Argent Facility. Argent Facility brings the campaign onto the Martian surface and makes the scale of the UAC's mistake feel much larger. The facility is built around Argent Energy, and every piece of machinery shows how completely the UAC turned hell into a power source. Hayden sends the Slayer to disable the Argent filters, but of course he still sees the energy system as something worth preserving. Our response is direct. We destroy the filters because in our simple mind, founded on violence, the invasion cannot be separated from the technology that made it possible. That choice turns the mission into a character statement because the Slayer treats Hayden's greater good argument like a customer service complaint from Hell's regional manager. Olivia Pierce becomes more dangerous here because she's moving faster than Hayden can contain, and the mission creates the sense that we are chasing someone who has already planned the next disaster. The outdoor setting also gives Mars a stronger identity, with industrial platforms, red dust, and massive UAC structures showing how deeply the company carved into the planet. By the end, the campaign has shifted from emergency response into sabotage, and the Slayer is clearly willing to burn the UAC's future to close the door they opened. Death count, 8 deaths. 8 deaths continues the steady climb from Foundry and shows Hell is adding more pressure without breaking its flow. At this point, the demons are still fighting fair, but it's starting to make hesitation expensive. Argent Facility feels like Doom handing you a moral dilemma, and then immediately handing you a shotgun so that dilemma can be resolved loudly. Mission 5, Argent Energy Tower. Argent Energy Tower turns the campaign into a race against Olivia Pierce. After the Slayer destroys the Argent filters, Olivia moves to the tower and uses the UAC's own energy system to push the invasion forward. The mission works because the tower feels like the perfect symbol of the whole disaster. Huge, powerful, impressive, and built directly on top of something nobody should have trusted. Hayden still wants control, Olivia wants transformation, and us, the Slayer, we want the entire machine broken before it can feed Hell any further. Climbing the tower gives the mission a strong sense of escalation because every platform brings the player closer to the source of the UAC's ambition. The ending cutscene lands because Olivia succeeds anyway, opening the portal and proving Hayden's damage control has completely failed. The Slayer has been unstoppable in every room so far, but this mission shows that raw violence cannot always outrun someone who's already rigged the system. By the end, the campaign has crossed the threshold from Mars containment into direct descent into Hell. Death count, 8 deaths. Difficulty is staying about the same and consistent with Argent Facility, but the pressure feels different here. Argent Energy Tower adds verticality, platforming, and longer arena sequences that force us to manage movement more precisely. The mission also starts to make the environment feel dangerous because falling, climbing, and fighting all share the same space. The death count suggests that the mission pushed through positioning and momentum rather than one overwhelming enemy wall. Feels like Doom is asking if we can fight demons while climbing industrial scaffolding built by people who clearly hated guardrails. The result is a level that stays fair but keeps enough pressure on us to make Olivia's escape feel earned. Mission 6, Katangir Sanctum. Katangir Sanctum throws us directly into Hell after Olivia opens the portal at the Argent Energy Tower. The campaign leaves the UAC facility behind and enters a place that feels older, stranger, and far more personal to the Slayer. The mission reframes us as an angry man in armor into a figure Hell already recognizes and fears. Of course, our main goal is to fight our way through Hell and return to Mars. While we are fighting our way through, the Slayer testaments start turning our silence into mythology, describing us as a force that demons have tried and failed to bury. The lore changes the tone of the campaign because we are now walking through enemy territory as the monster in their legend. Hayden's corporate explanations fade behind skulls, temples, blood rituals, and the sense that the UAC stumbled into a war that began long before Mars. The mission also makes Olivia's plan feel larger because the portal has connected modern science with an ancient conflict the UAC and Samuel Hayden barely understand. By the end, the Sanctum has expanded Doom from a containment failure into a mythic revenge story where Hell already knows exactly who we are and how we showed up. Since the demons know who just showed up, they throw us a nice reunion party by introducing the floating cacodemons, the flying lost souls, and the savage barons of Hell. Death count, 4 deaths. 4 deaths is surprisingly controlled for the first full Hell mission. The Sanctum looks more hostile than the earlier Mars levels, but the encounters are readable enough that I settled into the new setting without getting buried. Honestly, I think the fast playstyle required to survive Doom is more up my alley than that of other games like Halo, and that's why this game hasn't been giving me any trouble as of yet. I think it's funny because we can compare it to Halo, and I was fighting walls of difficulty at this point because it's just that slow playstyle required to survive in Halo. But seriously, this feels like the campaign opening a giant curse door and saying, relax, the architecture is worse than the difficulty. The result is a mission that feels massive without turning it into the biggest mechanical spike yet. Mission 7, Argent Facility Destroyed. Argent Facility Destroyed begins with the Slayer returning from Hell to a Mars facility that has been ripped open by the portal. The Argent Tower is gone, Hell has overrun the surface, and the UAC's Miracle Energy project now looks like a planet-sized liability. Hayden greets our return with optimism because he sees a path to recovery, but the environment says the damage has already outrun his control. The mission reframes Mars as the middle ground between corporate science and Hell's invasion, with even broken platforms and burning machinery showing how completely those worlds have fused. The new objective sends us towards the Lazarus Labs, where the Argent Accumulator can help reopen the path to Hell, leading us towards the Crucible. That setup gives us, in the campaign, a clearer long-term goal. We need the Crucible to shut down the portal for good. Olivia's victory at the tower now has consequences across the whole facility, and Mars feels like it's being converted room by room into Hell's front lobby. We've moved past containment and into the search for the one weapon that can end the invasion at its source. Death count, 11 deaths. Not much to say here. The game is still fair, but the margin for sloppy movement is shrinking fast. Mission 8, Advanced Research Complex. Advanced Research Complex is a little detour before Lazarus Labs, and it brings us, the Slayer, back face-to-face with Samuel Hayden. This changes him from a remote handler into a physical reminder of the UAC's ambition. He forcibly installs a dimensional tether into the Praetor suit that then explains the UAC's knowledge of Argent energy came from the Helix Stone. The Helix Stone paints the big target for us to go rip and tear. The well in Hell, the energy source keeping the portal active. Unfortunately, my recording of this mission got corrupted, so you'll just have to imagine a big robot that is Samuel Hayden right now. But this mission is where we also get to pick up the BFG 9000, which feels like the UAC accidentally built the perfect employee offboarding tool for D. Death count, 14 deaths here, makes Advanced Research Complex the hardest mission so far. It is almost a 50% jump from earlier missions, so the demons are tightening their grip, applying more pressure, while also keeping or asking for cleaner arena control. This mission introduces heavier combinations, bigger spaces, and more movement where we have to manage threats from every angle. That's in part why I feel like the game gives us the BFG 9000. If you start to get overwhelmed, just drop your own personal demon nuke to experience Serenity again. Of course, because I'm an old school scarcity gamer, I have hardly ever used the BFG 9000. Like, what happens if I need the ammo later, right? Well, reality is, that just makes the game harder for myself, but hey, it's a nice challenge. Even without playing stupid like that, the level earns its difficulty because the story is escalating, bigger lore, bigger tools, and bigger consequences. Mission 9, Lazarus Labs. This is finally where we enter Olivia Pierce's domain, and the mission shows how far her obsession with Hell has already spread before the invasion fully broke loose. The lab reveals a company studying demonic bodies, artifacts, portals, and Argent energy with the confidence of people who heard screaming from another dimension and started building a conference room around it. The Helix Stone gives us the knowledge needed to reach the well, which turns the mission into a final piece of setup before the campaign returns to Hell with purpose. Olivia's role also becomes clearer because her betrayal grows out of years of sanctioned research, private ambition, and a USC culture that treated impossible danger as career development. The Cyber Demon fight gives the mission its major payoff by turning the UAC's experiments into a living punishment that the Slayer has to break apart. After the Cyber Demon falls, we use the Argent Accumulator to rip open a path back to Hell, where we take on the Cyber Demon again. By the end, we're done with investigating and have moved on to execution. The Slayer knows where the source is, and the only thing left is to enter Hell and shut it down. Death count, 28, 33, or 5. Lazarus Labs is on Mars, but you could have fooled me if you said this was in the deepest, darkest depths of Hell. Fun fact, this is another mission where my footage got corrupted, so I played it twice. First time, I got annihilated 28 times, making this first and biggest difficulty spike of the game, and 2, the most difficult mission of the game for me. The Cyber Demon fight is obviously the centerpiece because it tests patience, precision, in a way that normal arenas usually avoid. The reason the first time was so hard is because I blew my load of BFG ammo on the Cyber Demon in the first encounter because I was thinking, let's use the ammo to make the game easier, right? Well, I learned the hard way that that's just gonna make the second encounter harder, like 10 times harder, because I had to whittle down his health one shotgun blast at a time. Not to mention, I had a major skill issue of double jumping his attacks, taking a load of damage each time versus just jumping once. So by the time I was playing through it the second time playing through so I could have footage of the fight, I saved BFG ammo and mastered the dodge cadence, resulting in only 1 death on the Cyber Demon. The second time playing through the mission punishes panic hard, especially when health, armor, and ammo management starts feeling like 3 separate fires in the same kitchen. Compared with Advanced Research Complex at 14 deaths, this is a massive jump, which tells us Lazarus Labs becomes the first real progression stopper of the run. It feels like the game is finally looking at everything it has taught us and says, great, now prove it. Prove it while this building science project tries to tear your spine from your body. Mission 10, Titan's Realm. Titan's Realm drops us, the Slayer, deeper into Hell after the Cyber Demon fight and shifts the campaign into an ancient battlefield territory. This mission is built around the remains of a massive dead titan, which makes Hell feel less like a demon homeworld and more like a graveyard for wars that happened long before the UAC arrived. The scale tells us the Slayer's history with Hell is older and bloodier than Mars's outbreak. Every skull gate, ritual chamber, and corpse-covered arena builds the sense that the Crucible belongs to a conflict with mythic weight. The Slayer is chasing the weapon that can shut it all down, the Well. And the mission turns that search into a descent through Hell's own history. Aiden and the UAC feel far away from here, because the story is now driven by the Slayer, the demon, and the ancient power both sides understand. Death count, 1. This mission is a refresh button on difficulty after Lazarus Labs. Titan's Realm looks intimidating, but the actual run was far more controlled, in part due to the fact that weapon upgrades, ammo upgrades, runes, and everything are reaching their peak power. The game is still throwing hell at us, but now we are speaking fluent shotgun, making this one giant victory lap through a dead giant. Mission 11, the Necropolis. The Necropolis pushes the Slayer through one of Hell's most sacred and hostile spaces in search of the Crucible. After Titan's Realm established the scale of the ancient Hell, this mission turns that scale into a guarded tomb built around power, rituals, and fear. The Slayer is no longer following the trail of the UAC's mistakes. We're now moving through Hell's own defenses to take a weapon that can end the invasion at its source. The mission reveals how seriously Hell protects the Crucible, because the weapon is treated like a relic powerful enough to change the outcome of the war. The Hell Guards give the level its major story payoff by turning the search into a trial, forcing us to defeat the Guardians before claiming the blade. Their defeat reinforces the mythology built across the campaign. Hell can delay him, trap him, and surround him, but it cannot keep him away from what he came to take. Getting the Crucible gives the campaign its final direction, because the Slayer finally has the tools needed to shut down the Well. By the end, we're beelining it back towards the source of the invasion. Death count, 3 deaths. Again, not much to say here, just another mission where the rhythm of doom hits and rewards your skills that you've slowly built up to this point. Mission 12, Vega Central Processing. Vega Central Processing brings the campaign back to Mars with the Crucible in hand and one final path back to Hell. The Slayer needs to reach the Well, and Hayden's plan requires destroying Vega's core to create the portal that can send us there. Think of this as the UAC's ritual sacrifice to survive. This gives the mission a different kind of weight, because Vega has been one of the calmest voices in the campaign, built out of screaming, fire, and corporate failure. The mission reveals that the UAC's most advanced system has become disposable once the invasion reaches its final stages. Vega accepts his destruction with a strange calm, which makes the moment feel colder than most of the campaign's louder deaths. The most important thing to note is the Slayer backing up Vega before the core is destroyed, giving him a small but meaningful character beat, showing that his rage has direction, his violence has boundaries. The mission turns a technical objective into a quiet sacrifice, because the path to the Well is opened by shutting down the one UAC creation that actually helped. By the end, Mars has served its purpose, and the campaign sends us, the Slayer, back into Hell to finish the source of the invasion. Death count, 7 deaths. 7 deaths makes Vega Central Processing a controlled step up after the Necropolis. The mission is basically the world's worst IT shutdown request, except the computer is polite, the building is exploding, and the help desk answer is still a shotgun. Mission 13, Argent Denure. Argent Denure sends us back into Hell for the final mission. The campaign finally reaches the source of the invasion. The Well is powered by trapped race, which turns the final objective into something bigger than destroying machinery or closing another portal. The Slayer uses the Crucible to free the race and then cut off the energy, keeping the connection between Mars and Hell alive. That gives the ending a mythic quality, because the weapon the campaign has been chasing becomes the key to ending a war built on stolen power. Olivia Pierce reaches the end of her path here, and her transformation into the Spider Mastermind shows how completely Hell used her ambition against her. The final boss makes her downfall feel like the last physical form of the UAC's arrogance, obsession, and refusal to leave Hell alone. After the Spider Mastermind's fall, Aiden pulls us back to Mars using the tether and takes the Crucible, proving he still believes Argent energy can be controlled. The campaign ends with the invasion stopped, the Slayer betrayed, and humanity's savior locked away, because the man who caused the disaster still wants to keep the power source. Death count, 9 deaths. This gives Argent Denure a strong final mission count without reaching the brutal spike of Lazarus Labs. The level has real endgame pressure, but by this point we have an arsenal and plenty of upgrades to assist us through. The Spider Mastermind adds the final test, because the fight demands movement, pattern reading, weapon choice, and resource awareness under constant pressure. The game has spent 12 missions teaching us to survive chaos. Then the finale asks us to cash in on the whole degree while fighting a giant demon brain. So, once all is said and done, how does Doom measure up? After all 13 missions, Doom 2016 finished with 108 deaths, not counting my second playthrough of Lazarus Lab, which makes it a tough campaign, but also surprisingly readable. The game rarely feels random. Most of the deaths come from losing rhythm, making bad movement choices, or getting trapped in arenas where enemies are punishing panic immediately. That's why Lazarus Lab stands out so much with 28 deaths. It was the moment where the campaign stopped asking if we understood Doom's combat loop and started asking if we could survive it while a cyber demon tried to turn me a piece of workplace debris. This brings the game's total difficulty in line with some of the later Halo games while still being far easier than Halo 3 ODST and the Bioshock game. So, is Doom 2016 hard? Yes, but its difficulty is rarely cheap. It's hard because it demands confidence, movement aggression, and fast decisions. By the end, the game proves that Doom did not need to come back quieter, smarter, or safer. It came back louder, meaner, and somehow with better corporate satire than most office jobs. The real question is, how does this first entry in the reboot measure up to Doom Eternal, where hell gets faster, and movement is the life force that sustains you? Mission 1, Hell on Earth. Hell on Earth is the perfect opening for the larger question of whether Doom Eternal refined Doom 2016 or overcomplicated it. The mission starts with Earth already broken, which gives the sequel a bigger stage right away. Doom 2016 opened with pure instinct. Wake up, grab a gun, punch everything that moves, and figure out the rest later. Doom Eternal opens with that same Slayer energy, but now the game immediately adds more structure around it through weak points, tutorials, platforming, resource cycling, codex lore, and a clearer villain hierarchy. The Hell Priest gives the campaign a direct target list, turning the invasion into a hunt through Hell's chain of command. Diag Neolix becomes the first priest marked for execution, and this tells us the Slayer is moving through this war with purpose, even if the gameplay is already starting to feel busier than Doom 2016. The ruined cities, demonic broadcasts, and human panic sells the scale of the invasion, while the combat begins testing whether the extra systems make the power fantasy sharper or more demanding. Hell on Earth establishes Doom Eternal as louder, faster, more mechanical sequel, but it also plants the core tension of the video. Did this game improve the formula, or did Doom 2016 already hit the cleaner version of Demon Demolition? Death count, I died one time in Hell on Earth, which makes this mission feel like a controlled opening statement. Everything is still readable, forgiving, and built to introduce Eternal's new expectations without crushing us immediately. That one death also supports the bigger comparison with Doom 2016. At this point, Eternal still feels close to the old formula because the arenas are manageable, enemies are readable, and the power fantasy still comes through cleanly. The added complexity is visible, but it's not fully taken over yet. Mission 1 feels like the game saying, trust me, this all has a purpose, while quietly loading 15 more mechanics behind that curtain. Mission 2, Exultia. Exultia is where Doom Eternal starts showing how much larger and busier the sequel wants to be than Doom 2016. Hell on Earth gave us the invasion. Exultia pulls the Slayer into ancient Sentinel history, ruined kingdoms, and a war that clearly started long before Earth fell. King Novik gives the campaign its first major mythic warning, and his presence makes the Slayer feel like a legendary weapon with a past full of oaths, violence, and consequences. The mission also expands the playable formula through dashing, heavier platforming, larger arenas, and more deliberate resource pressure. Doom 2016 kept its brilliance in the simplicity of movement, aggression, and momentum, while Exultia shows Eternal pushing that loop towards something more demanding and mechanical. The Betrayer adds tragedy to the Sentinel's lore, revealing how grief and broken loyalty helped Hell gain power in the larger conflict. The story layer gives the campaign more weight even as the mission starts proving Eternal wants the player to think faster, move faster, and manage more systems at once. Exultia shifts the campaign from Earth's invasion into a mythic war across worlds. It's raising the central question again, is the added complexity refinement, or is Doom Eternal already starting to overstuff the formula that Doom 2016 made feel effortless? Death count. I died 8 times in Exultia, which is a clear jump from the single death in Hell on Earth. That jump shows the game widening the gap between Doom 2016's cleaner combat loop and Eternal's more demanding rhythm. This mission is still fair, but I think it asks for more constant attention through dashing, platforming, resource cycling, and enemy pressure, and the arena awareness. We are no longer just demolishing demons through instinct. The game is training us to treat every fight like a moving puzzle where ammo, health, armor, cooldowns, and positioning all have to be solved while something with teeth is sprinting at your face. This is where the sequel starts feeling brilliant and exhausting at the same time. Mission 3, Cultist Base. Cultist Base is where Doom Eternal starts showing the cost of making everything bigger than Doom 2016. After Exaltia opens the Sentinel mythology, this mission brings the war back to the demon cult infrastructure supporting the invasion. The target is Diag Renak, the next Hell Priest, and the setting turns his role from a name on a list into proof that Hell has a whole machine built around worship, experimentation, and military production. The base feels like a frozen cathedral factory with cultists, treating demon technology like religion, an industry welded into one ugly business model. That gives the campaign the sharp sense of organization because Earth is being destroyed by an enemy with priests, facilities, followers, and weapons program. This is also where Eternal starts stretching the Doom 2016 formula hardest because the arenas are more aggressive, the traversal becomes more demanding, and the enemy roster starts punishing lazy habits. The Slayer is still framed as the ultimate weapon and answer to Hell, but the player now has to manage the fantasy through cooldowns, weak points, movement routes, ammo conversion, and the constant threat prioritization. By the end, Cultist Base makes the sequel Ambition impossible to ignore. Doom Eternal has more lore, more structure, and more combat depth, and the extra weight starts testing whether refinement and overload are separated by a very thin wall. Death count, I died 23 times in Cultist Base, which is the first major spike of the campaign. This isn't quite on par with the hardest mission of Doom 2016, but it's already starting to get close, and we're still only 1/3 of the way through the game. Clearly, that number makes Mission 3 the first strong evidence that Doom Eternal is harder and busier than Doom 2016. A mission with 23 deaths this early says the game has moved past introduction and into enforcement. The pressure is fair, but it is also relentless enough to make the previous game loop feel cleaner by comparison. Eternal starts feeling brilliant, demanding, and occasionally, like the demons formed a committee to audit your reflexes. Mission 4, Doom Hunter Base. Doom Hunter Base is where Doom Eternal turns Diag Renax from a distant Hell Priest into the architecture of a weapon designed specifically to kill the Slayer. After Cultist Base proved how organized the demonic war machine has become, the simple mission pushes deeper into that infrastructure and reveals a full facility built around reviving and upgrading ancient hunters. The Doom Hunter gives the campaign a more personal kind of threat because Hell is now building enemies with the Slayer in mind. That shifts the conflict from invasion cleanup into targeted escalation. Renak believes technology, ritual, and demonic engineering can finally create something strong enough to stop the one thing that Hell fears. The mission also supports the larger question because the boss design turns combat into a layered checklist of movement, weak points, shield, ammo control, and target discipline. Eternal's added complexity feels more purposeful here because the mission has one clear idea: survive. Survive the thing that was built to counter you. By the end, the Slayer destroys the demon hunters and executes Renak, proving that Hell can build an anti-Slayer weapon and still end up with a very expensive pile of parts. Death count, I died 5 times in Doom Hunter Base, which is a major drop from the 23 deaths in Cultist Base. This mission is sharper and more readable even though the boss itself is built around multiple mechanics. The difficulty comes from understanding the Doom Hunter's layers, breaking its defenses, and staying mobile under pressure. After Cultist Base scattered pressure across arenas and enemy types, this mission focuses that pressure into a clear test. 5 deaths also shows that Eternal's complexity can work when the encounter has a strong shape. When you get into the perfect flow state with Doom Eternal, it's easier than the previous game. The question is, how easy is it to tap into that flow state? The game never stops demanding more than Doom 2016, but here the added systems feel like a duel complete, with one priest proudly unveiling his masterpiece 5 minutes before he gets turned into scrap metal. Mission 5, Super Gore Nest. Since the Con Maker has hidden the third priest from us, we turn our focus onto the Super Gore Nest, where Doom Eternal turns Earth's invasion from a global disaster into something physical, disgusting, and deeply rooted in the planet. After the Slayer kills 2 Hell Priests, the campaign shifts towards cutting off the massive demonic growth feeding Hell's control over Earth. The Super Gore Nest feels like a city-sized infection, with flesh, steel, and demonic architecture fused together into one gigantic wound. This mission gives the invasion a body, and the Slayer is basically performing emergency surgery with a shotgun. The story function is simple and effective: destroy the nest, weaken Hell's hold, and keep pushing forward towards that final priest. The level also pushes the Doom 2016 versus Doom Eternal debate harder because its arenas are dense, colorful, vertical, and loaded with enemies, hazards, key routes, and resource checks. Eternal's combat loop becomes more impressive here, but it also starts feeling way more demanding for anyone who misses the clean rhythm of Doom 2016. By the end, destroying the Super Gore nest gives humanity some breathing room, while the campaign proves Eternal wants every major victory to feel like you survived a demonic obstacle course designed by someone who hates pedestrians. Death count. I died 26 times in Super Gore Nest, making it the hardest mission so far. The number shows how aggressively the mission stacks pressure through arena layout, enemy variety, vertical movement, and constant resource management. This is where Eternal's complexity starts feeling exciting and exhausting at the same time. The combat gives you tons of tools, but the mission expects you to use all of them while moving, swapping weapons, managing amp, hunting for health, watching cooldowns, and avoiding whatever nightmare just spawned behind you. Compared that with Doom 2016, this mission makes the sequel feel deeper, faster, and much more mentally crowded. Super Gore Nest is brilliant when everything clicks, but 26 Deaths says the game is already pushing past Demon Demolition and into Demon Demolition with a project management certificate required. Mission 6, Arc Complex. Arc Complex brings the campaign back to Earth and shows what the human resistance looks like after living under Hell's invasion. After Super Gore Nest turns the invasion into biological nightmares, this mission shifts the focus to the Ark, the last major military force still trying to hold the line. Samuel Hayden returns as a damaged but very valuable figure, which immediately connects Doom Eternal back to Doom 2016's biggest unresolved human power play. In Doom 2016, Hayden was the corporate genius who treated Hell Energy like a business opportunity with acceptable losses, which is exactly the kind of idea only a CEO and a demon could both admire. In Eternal, he becomes less of a villainous operator and more of a broken war asset, giving the Slayer information that moves the hunt towards the final Hell Priest. The mission expands the larger debate because Hayden's return shows how much more the story structure Eternal wants around the same demon-killing formula. The combat also feels more controlled after Super Gore Nest, with the big city destruction, clearer forward momentum, and a mission goal that keeps the chaos pointed in one direction. By the end, Arc Complex reframes Hayden as a necessary source of knowledge, sending the campaign towards the Mars core, and proves Eternal can balance scale, lore, and combat pressure when the mission has a clean spine. Death count. I died 9 times in Arc Complex, which is a major step down from the 26 in Super Gore Nest. The mission is still dangerous, but it's much easier to read. The arena hits harder, especially with heavier enemy pressure, and the Marauder showing up as Eternal's new personality test with an axe. Even then, the mission feels more focused because the objective is clear and the environment guides the player better. 9 Deaths shows that Eternal added some systems, and it can feel intense without becoming overwhelming. Our complex is still more complicated than pretty much anything in Doom 2016, but this is one of the places where the complexity feels closer to a cinematic escalation rather than mechanical clutter. Mission 7, Mars Core. Mars Core is Doom Eternal at its most ridiculous, and this is exactly why the mission works. After Arc Complex brings Samuel Hayden back into the story, Mars Core uses his knowledge to send the Slayer towards Sentinel Prime and the final Hell Priest. The problem is the path runs through Mars, so the Slayer responds with the most Doom solution possible. Use a massive cannon to shoot a hole into the planet. The mission turns Eternal's larger scale into comedy, spectacle, and momentum all at once. Doom 2016 was at its best when the Slayer treated every obstacle like a door that had not been punched correctly, and Mars Core captures the same spirit with even bigger toys. The BFG 10,000 gives the campaign one of the most memorable power fantasy moments, while the trip into Mars pulls the story closer to Sentinel history and the next major lore reveal. The combat still has Eternal's added systems, but the mission goal is so clear that the chaos feels easier to accept. Mars Core transformed the hunt from one final priest into a planet-cracking detour, proving that Eternal's complexity works best with the mission when the mission gives the player one absurd objective and lets the Slayer solve it with unreasonable confidence. Death count. I died 8 times in Mars Core, which keeps the difficulty steady after Arc Complex without reaching the punishment of Cultist Base or Super Gore Nest. Clearly, the mission has pressure, but the pacing and objectives stay readable. The arenas are intense, the platforming keeps us moving, and the pressure still demands resource discipline. Even with all of that, Mars Core feels controlled because the mission is built around one giant action movie idea. Shooting a hole in Mars buys the game a lot of goodwill because sometimes good level design is just letting the player commit interplanetary property damage. Mission 8, Sentinel Prime. Sentinel Prime is where Doom Eternal slows down the chaos and finally lets the Slayer's history take center stage. After Mars Core gives the campaign one of its loudest action moments, this mission walks into ancient Sentinel territory with a completely different kind of weight. The setting feels sacred, political, and ceremonial, which makes the Slayer look less like a random force of destruction and more like a figure returning to a world that already knows his legend. Deag Grab becomes the final Hell Priest target, but the real shift comes from seeing how the Khan Maker, the Sentinels, and Hell's Invasion are tangled together through old rules and older betrayals. The Khan Maker tries to control the Slayer through law, warning, and divine authority, and the Slayer answers by executing the priest anyway. That moment tells us exactly what kind of character he is. If the rules protect Hell, the rules are getting punched too. The gladiator fight then turns Sentinel Prime into a ritual trial, giving the mission a cleaner structure than the busier arena-heavy levels before it. By the end, the Hell Priest is dead, the Khan Maker becomes the true enemy, and the campaign moves from hunting priests to challenging the power behind the entire invasion. Death count. I died 9 times in Sentinel Prime, which makes sense because most of the mission's pressure comes from the gladiator fight. This is a more focused difficulty spike than Super Gorness or Cultist base because the level is built around one major test instead of constant arena overload. That makes the mission feel more readable even when the boss starts punishing bad timing, sloppy movement, and or missed opportunities and openings. The death count also supports the larger Doom 2016 versus Doom Eternal debate in an interesting way. Sentinel Prime proves Eternal can use its complexity with restraint when the mission narrows the player's attention. 9 Deaths says the fight pushed back, but the mission structure stayed clean, which makes this one of Eternal's strongest examples of depth without the full demon spreadsheet experience. Mission 9, Taras Nabad. Taras Nabad turns Sentinel history into the key to stopping the Icon of Sin. After Sentinel Prime kills the final Hell Piece and exposes the Khan Maker as the true power behind the invasion, the campaign needs a weapon strong enough to end the next phase of the war. That sends the Slayer into the ruined heart of Argent D'Nur, a fallen Sentinel city that feels like a monument to everything Hell corrupted and everything the Slayer lost. The mission gives his legend more texture by tying the Crucible to the ancient battles against the Titans beneath the city. This makes the Slayer feel like a myth walking through the wreckage of his own history, pulling an old weapon out of an old wound. Taras Nabad also deepens the contrast between Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal because the sequel keeps stacking story context around the violence, turning every major weapon into a piece of history. The mission scale, Sentinel architecture, and heavier enemy pressure all push the campaign towards the final act, where Hell, Urdak, and the Makers are about to collide. We obtain the Crucible, and the endgame has a clairvoyant path, and Eternal has finally committed to being a bigger, denser, and more lore-driven version of Doom. Death count. I died 13 times in Taras Nabad, which makes it one of the easier or moderate difficulty levels for Doom Eternal, while also being more difficult than most of the missions in Doom 2016. Mission 10 and 11, Necroval. Necroval is where we learn about the industrial system Hell has built up. After Taras Nabad gives the Slayer the Crucible, the campaign sends him into the city of Necroval to find a path to the Urdak and confront the Khan Maker directly. Hell is harvesting human souls and refining them into Argent energy, which makes the invasion feel even more horrifying because Earth is being turned into fuel, kind of similar to the Matrix. This reframes the Makers because their divine image starts cracking once we see the machinery that supports their power. Doom 2016 already showed us the danger of exploiting Argent energy, but Necroval shows the full supply chain behind it. The result is, we finally make the connection to corporate greed, Hell's cruelty, and the Maker's corruption in one massive soul processing operation. The Slayer's climb through the facility feels like an attack on the engine behind the entire war. Necroval pushes the campaign into the final cosmic conflict. Destroying demons is no longer enough because the system feeding them has to be ripped apart too. The Khan Maker feels less divine and more like the executive sponsor of the worst energy project in history. The mission ends by pushing the Slayer through the portal to Urdak, shifting the campaign from Hell's industrial horror to the corrupted heaven benefiting from it. Death count. I died 10 times in Necroval. Necroval is dense, hostile, and built around a steady climb through heavy resistance. Necroval Part 2, I died 4 times, which makes this one of the smoother later campaign missions. This is one of the places where Eternal's extra lore and combat systems feel focused. The missions have spectacle, momentum, and a clean story direction. Necroval Part 2 proves Eternal can still lets the player feel powerful, even while explaining that the entire universe apparently runs on a soul-powered utility bill with a warranty policy that the Slayer is there to void with extreme prejudice. Mission 12, Urdak. Urdak is where Doom Eternal pulls the mask off its version of heaven. After Necroval reveals that Hell is harvesting souls into Argent energy, Urdak shows the polished world that benefits from that suffering. Urdak has a divine beauty to it. But the beauty is corrupted by demons and the Makers. The Makers present themselves as divine, but the mission reveals a civilization powered by corruption, dependency, and a bargain with hell. That gives the Con Maker a strong villain shape because she is protecting an entire system built on sacrifice. Doom 2016 kept the story tighter around Mars, Argent Energy, and Samuel Hayden's ambition, while Eternal expands that same energy crisis into a cosmic supply chain. The Slayer entering Urdak turns the final act into a direct assault on false divinity, with the player breaking sacred machinery like customer support finally escalated the ticket to violence. The mission also sets up the Icon of Sin as the final consequence of the Con Maker's desperation, because losing control of the ritual unleashes the very thing she tried to use. By the end, Urdak has collapsed from heavenly order into cosmic panic, and the campaign points everything back towards Earth for the one final fight. Death count. I died 12 times in Urdak, which makes this feel like a real final stretch test before the finale. This is where Eternal's beauty and chaos start competing for attention. The setting is stunning, but the combat can feel crowded because the game is asking for movement, target priority, resource cycling, and visual tracking all at once. My 12 deaths say that Urdak earns its place near the end, while also proving the larger point of the video. Eternal's ambition is impressive, and sometimes the ambition makes the cleaner loop of Doom 2016 feel more timeless. Mission 13, Final Sin. Final Sin brings Doom Eternal back to Earth for the full collapse of everything the Con Maker tried to control. After Urdak falls into chaos and the Icon of Sin is unleashed, the campaign returns to the invasion where it all started, except now the threat has a face, a body, and enough size to make city planning feel pointless. The Icon of Sin turns the final mission into a race against extinction, because every second it remains alive pulls Earth closer to total consumption. This is where Eternal's larger mythology, Sentinel history, and Maker corruption, as well as Hell's invasion, all converge into the one last target. Doom 2016 ended with betrayal and containment, while Eternal ends with the Slayer tearing through the consequences of an entire cosmic system built on harvested souls. The mission works because the objective is brutally clear: reach the Icon, break the Icon, and end the invasion through force. It also brings the Doom 2016 versus Doom Eternal debate to its final point, because Eternal's spectacle is bigger, louder, and more mechanically loaded than anything in Doom 2016. The Slayer destroys the Icon of Sin, saves Earth from total demonic collapse, and leaves the campaign feeling massive, exhausting, and undeniably committed to turning every final boss into a planetary emergency. Death count. I died 7 times in Final Sin, which is surprisingly controlled for the final mission. I don't remember my exact death count when I first played Doom Eternal years ago, but this definitely felt easier than I remember. Maybe it was a skill issue back then, and I had finally resolved that, but I think I had 7 deaths alone on the Icon of Sin fight way back in the day. Either way, Final Sin is the game saying, you learn the systems, now use them to kill a skyscraper. Your brain starts sounding like a microwave with anxiety. That is where the comparison to Doom 2016 becomes so interesting. Doom 2016 feels timeless because the loop is simple, readable, and brutally satisfying. You move forward, you kill demons, you stay aggressive, and the game keeps that fantasy clean from the beginning to the end. Doom Eternal takes that same foundation and builds a much bigger machine on top of it. When the machine works, it's incredible. When it gets crowded, I start missing the cleaner flow of Doom 2016. So, where do I land? Doom Eternal is absolutely harder than Doom 2016, but I don't think it fully replaces Doom 2016. Eternal is deeper, faster, bigger, and more ambitious, as Doom 2016 is cleaner, darker, more readable, and, for me, more timeless. Eternal is an amazing sequel because it pushes the formula as far as it can go. And 2016's Doom still feels like the game that perfected the core fantasy. So, my final answer is this. Doom Eternal is hard, and a lot of the time, it is brilliant. But if Doom 2016 is the perfect shotgun blast, Doom Eternal is a full weapon wheel exploding in your hands while 10 demons ask whether you remembered to manage your cooldown. And somehow, both are very Doom. But the real question is, how do these first 2 entries in the reboot measure up to Doom the Dark Age? Mission 1, Village of Kalim. Doom the Dark Ages opens in the village of Kalim by dropping the Slayer into a medieval demon invasion before the player has even processed that the shield is also a saw, because apparently blocking was too emotionally stable. The combat shotgun gives the opening a familiar Doom baseline, but the mission quickly builds the new identity around heavier movement, shield timing, and close range punishment. The Power Gauntlet pushes melee into the core rhythm, while the Shredder adds the first range tool for chewing through enemies as the battlefield widens. Kalim works as a battlefield deployment with the Slayer clearing the village, destroying portals, covering the Sentinel's escape, and turning a collapse into a temporary stand. The beach defense and the Titan encounter push the opening past tutorial territory and show the scale of the war immediately. The Dark Ages has made its pitch clearly. The Slayer is a frontline solution for problems that have already reached funeral planning. Death count, 1 death. The opening is reasonable, and the single death points to adjustment more than punishment. The pressure comes from learning when to block, throw the shield, close distance, and trust the power gauntlet without playing like Doom Eternal. Muscle memory is still driving the car. The game is teaching posture before panic, but it still finds one chance to humble us, because Doom tutorials believe in educating through violence. Mission 2, Hebeth. Hebeth moves the campaign from village defense into a sentinel weapon facility, giving the war a cleaner machine behind the chaos. The shield saw upgrade arrives here and turns the shield from defensive equipment into a spinning legal problem. The accelerator expands the arsenal with sustained plasma fire, giving the player a better mid-range attack for shields and clustered pressure. Together, these tools sharpen the identity of Doom the Dark Age. Hold ground, parry correctly, and punish anything stupid enough to enter your personal space. Story-wise, Hebeth shows that the Sentinel War effort depends on fragile infrastructure, weapons research, and power systems. Hell is actively corrupting. By the end, the Slayer has moved from saving civilians to protecting the system that keeps the war alive. Death count, 1 death in Hebeth. Hebeth stays inside the early learning curve, but the combat vocabulary is already expanding. The accelerator makes mid-range fights cleaner, while the shield saw rewards aggression when the timing is right. Death came here from treating our new tools like automatic solutions before understanding how they worked. Doom hands you power tools here, and quietly waits to see if you use them like a professional or like a guy banned from a hardware store. Mission 3, Barrier Core. Barrier Core gives the campaign its first huge scale break by putting the Slayer inside an Atlan. The facility crisis from Hebeth becomes a battlefield engineering problem, with the Slayer moving the power core away from the city and fighting threats that need machinery on scale of Titans. The Atlan changes the campaign language, immediately shifting from shield timing and weapon swapping into giant mech combat. The war now feels large enough to need the Slayer as both infantry and heavy equipment. This mission also gives the campaign a pressure release. After 2 grounded chapters, letting the player feel the power fantasy without juggling new weapon decisions is great. This is the point where Doom the Dark Ages has shown that its escalation will move between personal brutality and full battlefield spectacle. Death count, 0 deaths. Barrier Core is spectacle first and challenge second. The Atlan sequence gives us a clean power trip and keeps friction low before the regular mission starts tightening again. The mission is basically Doom saying, you learned the shield, now please enjoy beating a monster with municipal infrastructure. The 0 death count works because the chapter makes the war feel massive before it starts breaking us. Mission 4, Sentinel Barracks. Sentinel Barracks brings the campaign back to ground level and into the military heart of the Sentinel War effort. The Pulverizer gives the arsenal a wide crowd damage option, which fits a mission that starts throwing more bodies into the player's space. The Impaler adds a harder hitting precision weapon or option, so the mission expands both sides of the weapon identity, crowd control and focus punishment. The Demonic Essence armor upgrade also starts making progression feel meaningful because the game is quietly and clearly preparing to hit harder. Story-wise, the barracks shows the war invading defensive spaces that should feel secure, which tells the player how badly the front line is bending. By the end, the mission pushes towards the Dragon's Den and sets up an aerial war over Eratum. Death count, 4 deaths. This is the first clear bump in the curve. The death suggests that the enemy density, tighter area control, and heavier targets are starting to expose sloppy timing. The Pulverizer helps when fodder demons crowd the screen, while the Impaler rewards calmer aim against priority threats. Which is funny because the mission is absolutely allergic to calm. 4 deaths says the tutorial competence is tracking and growing. The arsenal now needs intent behind it. Mission 5, the Holy City of Eratum. The Holy City of Eratum is where the Dark Ages fully commits to fantasy war spectacle. Mecha Dragon turns the mission into aerial assault on Hellcarriers, and Doom suddenly feels like it wandered into heavy metal mythology and stole the parking spot. On foot, the Super Shotgun arrives and restores the classic Doom feeling of solving close-range problems with 2 barrels and 0 patience. The Cycler expands the plasma side of the arsenal while the mission keeps shifting between sky combat and ground pressure. Eratum turns the war into a fight over sacred infrastructure, with the Slayer pushing towards the Heart Chamber to recover the Heart of Argent. By the end, the campaign has widened from battlefield survival into a holy war over power sources, cities, and symbols. Death count, 6 deaths. This count reflects friction from a variety of different things. The dragon changes movement, threat reading, and target priority, while the ground sections and add weapons that make the Slayer stronger but speed up decision making. The super shotgun creates huge confidence, which works beautifully until confidence runs ahead of health and it gets eaten. 6 deaths feels right for a mission that hands you a dragon and somehow still forgets to include onboarding. Mission 6, Siege Part 1. Siege Part 1 is the first real wall of the campaign. The flail adds a stronger melee option for cracking enemies and controlling close pressure, while the chain shot gives the player a heavy range tool for larger threats. These unlocks arrive at the exact moment the game decides to make you earn every inch of ground. The Slayer is sent into a collapsing battlefield to destroy Gore Portal, hold back enemy waves, and fall back as the city defense starts buckling. The story and gameplay line up cleanly because the rising death count mirrors the Sentinels losing control over the front line. By the end, the campaign has moved from controlled escalation into open battlefield survival. Death count. 14 deaths. This is the first true difficulty spike. The deaths come from enemy density, wide objective spacing, Gore Portal management, and the constant feeling that every part of the map is becoming a problem at once. The flail and the chain shot help, but they arrive inside a mission that gives the player very little time to get comfortable. 14 Death says the warm-up is over, the siege has started, and Hell has discovered project management. Mission 7, Siege Part 2. Siege Part 2 continues the collapse, but pressure shifts from holding the battlefield to surviving the retreat. The Slayer fights through the city, reaches the turret, survives waves of demons, and falls back towards the hangar. There is no major new weapons here, which helps the pacing because the mission asks whether we learned the tools from the first siege. The flail and chain shot now have to prove their value while the battlefield keeps pushing wave pressure and turret defense. The health upgrade from the leader encounter also fits the curve since the game is clearly preparing the Slayer for longer fights with fewer clean exits. The siege has turned from defense into desperate extraction. Death count, 4 deaths. After 14 deaths in Siege Part 1, this cleaner count shows adaptation. The mission still has wave pressure, but the previous chapter already taught the lesson through blunt force trauma. The arsenal is starting to settle with the flail, chain shot, super shotgun, and shield tools working together instead of feeling like a medieval hardware store exploded in a weapon wheel. 4 Death says the game is still dangerous, but the player is finally fighting the siege instead of being professionally reorganized. Mission 8, Abyssal Forest. Abyssal Forest changes the texture after the siege by moving the Slayer into a dark environment built around gates, barracks, mines, and demonic infestation. The war moves from city defense into corrupted wilderness, which gives the campaign a useful change in mood. The grenade launcher arrives here, giving the player a strong area damage option and making enemy clusters easier to punish. That unlock fits the forest because uneven sightlines and crowded pockets can turn small fights into very messy ones very quickly. The armor upgrade from the leader encounter supports the same shift, helping the player survive damage from spaces that are harder to read cleanly. By the end, Abyssal Forest moves the campaign towards something older, buried, and deeply unpleasant. Death count, 3 deaths. This is controlled after the siege arc. The deaths came from 4 sightlines, denser enemy pockets, and adjusting to the grenade launcher rhythm. The grenade launcher gives a simple answer for groups, but also creates the classic Doom problem where confidence rises faster than health. 3 Deaths says that the chapter is tense without becoming a wall, which is impressive for a mission that trusts you with explosives. Mission 9, Ancestral Forge. Ancestral Forge gives the middle of the campaign a stronger lore spine by sending the Slayer into a space built around Sentinel history, ritual, and power. The mission revolves around charging the Ancestral Heart, activating switches, clearing camps, and entering the Forge itself. The demonic essence rewards, including health and cell ammo, to make this feel like a major strengthening chapter. The Ground Fissure Shield rune also expands the shield systems, keeping the central mechanic alive beyond basic defense and parry timing. The Forge connects the present war to a deeper Sentinel legacy, giving the campaign mythic weight before it pushes us into Hell's open terrain. By the end, the player has strengthened the arsenal, deepened the shield kit, and moved closer to the supernatural machinery behind the conflict. Death count, 5 deaths. Ancestral Forge is more demanding than the Forest, but the challenge stays fair. The pressure comes from more open exploration, enemy camps, leader fights, and long structures that give mistakes more room to compound. The upgrades help, but earning them requires a good target control and awareness. 5 deaths feels like the game checking fundamentals before the next escalation. The mission asks, have you mastered the shield yet? And then it grades you on how well you take care of the demons. Mission 10, the Forsaken Plains. The Forsaken Plains pushes the campaign into Hell and gives the mid-campaign a bigger sense of threat. The mission has Slayer breaching the front gate, destroying Hell's cannons, obtaining the Atlan core, and powering up the Atlan. The rocket launcher arrives at the front of the gate, which is perfect timing because the battlefield immediately starts asking for heavier answers. Multiple demonic essence upgrades, including skull ammo, health, armor, make this a major strengthening point before the next mech spectacle. The story is direct. The Slayer is breaking through Hell's battlefield infrastructure to bring the Atlan back online. By the end, the player has rockets, better survivability, and a direct path toward Azarak's castle. Death count, 3 deaths. This is a surprisingly clean mission, given that it gives you the rocket launcher and throws you into Hell's open war zone. The low count is starting to suggest that weapons are arriving just at the right time and giving you enough control to prevent larger fights from spiraling. The upgrades also help keep pace with the meaner enemies. 3 deaths says the mission has bite, but the toolkit is catching up. Giving the Slayer a rocket launcher in Hell feels like giving a raccoon a forklift, but somehow it works. Mission 11, Hellbreaker. Hellbreaker pays off the Atlan setup by turning the Slayer into a walking siege weapon again. The Atlan pushes towards Azarak's castle, smashing through Titans and carrying campaigns straight into enemy territory. After the mech section, the Holy Swarm shield rune adds another layer on top of the shield by turning clean parries into group damage. That upgrade fits the mission because the final approach tests crowd control, parry timing, and confidence under pressure. Azarak's hologram gives this chapter stronger villain presence, turning the Castle Assault into a direct challenge. By the end, the Slayer has breached the enemy's front door and pushed the campaign from warfront chaos toward personal confrontation. Death count, 0 deaths here. Hellbreaker works as a power fantasy and pacing reset. The Atlan section has scale, dodges, stomps, and titan crushing, but it never becomes a roadblock. The Holy Swarm shield rune makes the shield feel even more central by rewarding a clean defense with group damage. 0 deaths lets us enjoy being overpowered before the next climb. Hellbreaker is the game saying, you survived the siege, here's the mech, go commit architecture. And at this point, the Holy Swarm shield rune is what I use for the rest of the game. Mission 12, the Sentinel Command Station. Sentinel Command Station brings the campaign back into military infrastructure after the Atlan power trip. The Slayer recovers the hangar key card, opens the hangar, and reconnects with Surratt, so the campaign can return to dragon scale movement. The Ravager lands in the middle of this mission and gives the arsenal a focus damage tool for enemies who have survived the unusual nonsense for too long. The Demonic Essence health upgrade after the Pinky Rider fight makes this player sturdier before the difficulty of the next climb. The auto turret shield rune then turns the shield into a portable lawsuit, but I really never used it. The Slayer has reconnected with Surratt, expanded the shield kit, and pushed the campaign back towards supernatural threat. Death count, 7 deaths. This is a real pressure step after the clean Atlan chapter. The danger comes from tighter interiors, empowered enemies, ambush rooms, and the adjustment period around the Ravager. The auto turret rune arrives late enough to feel like a reward after the station has already dragged the player through several ugly rooms, but again, I had already upgraded the other shield rune, so I didn't really use it. 7 Deaths says the mission is built from smaller pressure points, with the game closing doors, filling rooms with demons, and hiding the keycard somewhere behind that trauma. Mission 13, From Beyond. From Beyond shifts the campaign back into the air and makes Surratt the center of the chapter. The Slayer hunts 3 tentacle weak points, lands to close 2 demonic portals, and keeps switching between dragon combat and normal arena fights. Surratt combat asks for a different kind of awareness, with perfect dodges, empowered attacks, lock-ons, and hellfighters pulling attention across the sky. The portal landings keep the chapter grounded, while the leader fights reward ammo and armor upgrades that prepare us for the next climb. The mission widens the threat from city siege into something stranger and cosmic. By the end, the campaign feels bigger, wider, and much harder to explain to a normal insurance adjuster. Death count, 5 deaths. The danger comes from control switching and aerial readability. Dragon chapters ask the player to read distance, incoming fire, weak points, and movement in a different combat language, but it's really easy because it's so simple. The ground fights interrupt that rhythm, which creates adjustment deaths even as the upgrades strengthen and our long-term build is just becoming cracked. 5 deaths feels fair for the chapter that's asking us to play both Dragon Pilot and Demon Exterminator. The Slayer can apparently do both, which feels like a resume lie until the bodies start piling up. Mission 14, Spire of Nerethal. Spire of Nerethal is the mid-campaign chapter where the game decides the player has become too comfortable and needs a scenic vacation inside a nightmare tower. The Slayer drains water levels, deactivates stasis emitters, obtains the BFC, and releases the old one. Heaven Splitter arrives during the stasis sequence, giving the shield another powerful rune option and making parries feel like divine weather with anger issues, but again, I didn't use this rune. The BFC becomes one of the campaign's biggest weapon moments, since the Ballistic Force crossbow is basically an apology for enemy health bars. The mission has ritual weight, with the player unlocking something ancient, buried, and surrounded by warning signs everyone has seemingly ignored. By the end, The old one is released, the arsenal has a massive emergency button, and the campaign has entered full Doom mythology mode. 13 deaths here. This is the second major spike of the playthrough. The pressure comes from the mission length, layered objectives, Komodo campaign pressure, stasis fights, water traversal, secret landing combat, and constant switching between Surratt and ground combat. Heaven Splitter helps once it clicks, but the mission keeps testing whether the player can create clean parry windows. The BFC is powerful, but the mission makes you earn it first. 13 deaths says mid-campaign, get serious and start charging rent. And again, a lot of these deaths came from right before we were going to get the BFC. It would have been very useful in the fight right before it, but, you know, we got to grind for our overpowered weapons every so often, right? Mission 15, City of Ryul. City of Ryul follows the old one chapter by moving into a portal-focused city full of cosmic eyes, shield charge rings, water sections, and puzzle movement. The objectives sound simple. Activate the portal and pass through the gate. In practice, the mission feels like a game built a theme park around shield mechanics and forgot the friendly signs. The Dread Mace arrives in the middle and gives melee combat a heavier identity, letting the Slayer answer crowded fights with a medieval workplace incident. But again, I had already upgraded the flail all the way and didn't really see any use in using this one because it had such a slow recharge. Health and armor upgrades from the leader fight keep survivability growing after Nerathal's punishment. The Slayer has activated the gate, strengthened the melee kit, and moved deeper into the strange religious machinery behind the war. Death count, 7 deaths. The count shows steady friction, but it's not a full wall. The pressure comes from movement puzzles, cosmic eye alignment, water sections, leader fights, and adjustment periods around the Dread Mace. The Dread Mace gives huge close range damage, but it also encourages greedy players and greedy plays in Doom, usually ending with a screen looking like a new medical invoice. 7 deaths fits the chapter that mixes combat, traversal, puzzles, and melee confidence. Mission 16, the Carthurl Marshes. The Carthurl Marshes slow the campaign into a swamp-based relic hunt after the stacked pressure of Nerathal and Ryul. The Slayer gathers 2 relic fragments, assembles the relic key, and enters the portal to keep the campaign moving. There is no major new weapons here, so the mission functions as a mastery check for the arsenal already earned. Leader fights reward armor and ammo upgrades, making the chapter a practical strengthening stop before the final third of the game. The wolf statue puzzle and the Raystones gives the marshes a stronger exploration identity, but the campaign has already moved from Mythic City traversal into a darker relic path towards the Temple of Lomerith. Death count, 2 deaths. The cleaner result suggests the mission is readable and forgiving than the last 2 chapters, and there isn't really much difficulty here. We have the BFC if things are hitting the fan, and it is a satisfying answer to large enemy groups that are getting too ambitious, but it really says that this mission, 2 deaths, the marshes work as a breather without going empty after Nerathal and Ryul. This mission lets us stretch our legs and only gets mildly bullied by the swamp. Mission 17, Temple of Lomerith. Temple of Lomerith moves the campaign into a coastal temple space built around gates, sunken ships, portals, and ancient sentinel machinery. The Slayer follows gates, activates pathways, swims through wreckage, and eventually enters the temple itself. Spike ammo and cell ammo upgrades fit the chapter because the game is building the player into a stronger walking disaster before the finale closes. The Raystone reward also makes Lomerith feel like a late campaign shopping trip where every aisle is haunted. Story-wise, the mission carries the player through another mythic threshold and deeper into older machinery behind the war. But Lomerith hands the next mission a much uglier setting. Death count, 5 deaths. This is a moderate count, and it's mostly due to leader fights. The ammo upgrades help with the large difficulty curve, but you do have to earn them, and it does require navigating spaces with less direct readability than standard arenas. 5 deaths says essentially the mission is fair while still punishing wandering attention. Temple of Lomerith asks us to solve ancient door problems while demons interrupt like they're paid to ambush. Mission 18, Belly of the Beast. Belly of the Beast is one of the most literal Doom mission titles possible because the Slayer is now fighting through a giant living nightmare and trying to escape. The mission starts with survival, then turns into destroying organs, entering the temple, and rescuing Thera. The setting shifts the tone immediately because the campaign leaves ancient ruins and moves into something wet, hostile, and medically concerning. There's no major new weapons here, so the mission is just testing our late-game toolkit. The armor upgrade from the Acolyte leader helps in packed spaces with acid pools and wave pressure, but overall the campaign has turned rescue, survival, and body horror into one compact chapter. Death count 2 deaths. The low death count here is because everything's readable. Like in Doom Eternal, it was a question of whether or not you could tap into the flow state, but with how generous shield parry times are, you can pretty much tap into that flow state at any point in time, and you can just dismantle the bigger demons by stunning them with the shield and just demolishing them with your weapons. The armor upgrades also help because it's a big factor in player adaptation. By this point, the shield, the BFC, Dread Mace, Super Shotgun, Rocket Launcher, Chain Shot, they're all working together, but you don't really need to have them work together. You can use the shield and you can use one trusty weapon. Mission 19, Harbor of Souls. Harbor of Souls turns the late campaign into a barrage theft mission, which gives the chapter a fun identity inside the larger war. The Slayer fights through enclosed spaces, activates mechanisms, raises water levels, grabs skull keys, and pushes towards the helm. Health and ammo upgrades keep progression moving, but you get ammo upgrades for the skull ammo, which I never used, and it's not like our heavy arsenal really demands any additional support at this point. The Raystone makes the chapter feel valuable for us because we can still use it to upgrade any of the odds and ends of our weapons that we haven't fully upgraded and use on a regular basis. Story-wise, the Slayer is now taking enemy infrastructure and steering the campaign towards the next confrontation. Hell has lost control of the ride, which feels like a serious asset protection failure. Death count 2 deaths. Harbor of Souls is tense, but it's controlled. Again, we're tapping into that flow state that is so much easier to tap into than Doom Eternal, and if you are in trouble, you use a BFC and lean into your shield runes and everything goes swimmingly. That's why it's really easy to feel a lot of good positive momentum instead of a roadblock here. Mission 20, Resurrection. Resurrection gives the late campaign a strong story by turning the Slayer back to the mortal plane and immediately throwing him into another siege. The mission starts with the Resurrection, then opens into a large battlefield built around destroying 3 siege towers. Each tower is tied to a leader fight, and those fights reward health, Reaver ammo, and armor upgrades. That structure makes the chapter feel like both a comeback and final preparation route. The wolf statue puzzle and Raystones add a few more upgrades before the final boss stretch. By the end, the Slayer is back, the arsenal is sharper, and the campaign is racing towards the final confrontation. Death count, 1 death here. Again, it's very clean. Yes, it's a large battlefield. Yes, there's a lot of enemies, but you can tap into that flow state. You can just dismantle the heavy demons by stunning them with your shield and demolishing them with a super shotgun or a rocket launcher or anything along that sort. It's essentially saying the Dark Ages combat language is very simple, much simpler than Doom Eternal. And so the Slayer returns from Resurrection and immediately resumes project work like hell forgot to revoke his building access. Mission 21, the final battle. The final battle is the campaign's real exam, and the death count proves it. The mission starts in an Atlan, with the Slayer destroying Hellgate generators, fighting multiple titans, and using the Siegebreaker shoulder cannons to finish and tear through the battlefield and giants. The opening is already huge, and the chapter escalates into a boss fight again, the old one. The old one demands boss pattern reading, dodges, astral projections, and clean reactions to a wide battlefield. Then the game rejects the Slayer from the mech and forces us to fight against enhanced Azrak, turning spectacle into a personal duel. By the end, every scale of the campaign has returned at once. Mech warfare, ancient horror, villain payoff, and grounded Slayer combat. Honestly, enhanced Azrak is a pain in the ass. I died pretty much every death in this mission in the enhanced Azrak fight. And by the end of this campaign, which we're really close to, you have to fight enhanced Azrak 5 separate times, which is insane. But, as I mentioned, death count, 27 deaths. This is the highest count in the entire playthrough. And it's a clear difficulty spike. And it's because Doom the Dark Ages, you have so many fodder demons out and about that you can always replenish health, replenish armor, replenish ammo. And the pressure in the final boss gauntlet, in the Titan fight, it's not that bad. Old one, pretty easy to read. Enhanced Azrak, that's a different story though. While Azrak tests parries, spacing, reaction, and patience, I certainly lacked in patience. The spike feels earned because the game has spent the whole campaign building the toolkit before asking for a final performance review from Hell's worst management team. 27 deaths clearly says the campaign saved its harshest lessons for the end and checked every mechanic, upgrade, bad habit, and ounce of confidence left in the room. Mission 22, Reckoning. Reckoning is the epilogue mission with Teeth. After the massive boss gauntlet, the entire campaign sends the Slayer through the temple grounds into the lower keep towards Azrak's ship and into the last push to destroy him. The mission feels like final cleanup, but it still has enough enemy pressure, secrets, keys, and upgrade rewards to close properly. I pretty much was bored of the combat loot at this point, so I didn't do any of the extra stuff. I upgraded my grenade launcher, and we were off to the races to take on Azrael. It is funny though, because there is a launcher armor ammo upgrade that I did pick up near the end, and it's funny because the game is still handing out capacity rewards after the final exam has already been given, and it gave me a concussion. The Raystone rubies and secrets make the chapter feel like there is a last chance to really brush up on anything, but again, I ignored them at this point. Reckoning narrows the campaign from cosmic spectacle into the final act of ending Azrael schemes. Death count, 9 deaths. This is a meaningful drop from Mission 21, but Reckoning still lands among the more dangerous late campaign chapters. The deaths come from the final boss fight. Yes, you have to fight Azrael 2 times in this mission and 3 times in the last mission. So at this point, like, you should know the loop, you should be able to anticipate the parries, but he does continue to add a few extra strikes here and there, and that's why I continued to die quite a few times. And really, the launcher ammo upgrade helps, but it arrives late enough to feel like the reward for surviving most of the chapter's pressure wasn't really that worth it. 9 Deaths says Reckoning refuses to become a victory lap. The game lets the player leave only after one last round of demon paperwork. So, after 22 missions, 121 deaths, multiple dragons, multiple mech fights, and one very angry shield, and enough modern demons to qualify hell for a population crisis, where does Doom the Dark Ages land? For me, it's far easier than Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. That may sound strange with 121 deaths, especially when the final battle alone came and caused 27 of those deaths, but the full campaign tells a different story. Most of the Dark Ages is very manageable once the shield rhythm clicks. The biggest spikes are obvious. It's in boss fights where you don't have a ton of fodder demon to help make sure you can keep up on your health. And the final battle becomes the last real exam. Outside of those moments, the game is smoother, more forgiving, and easier to stabilize than the previous 2 modern Doom games. Doom 2016 punished hesitation. Doom Eternal punished bad resource management. Doom the Dark Ages mostly punishes bad shield time or positioning, and moments where the battlefield gets too crowded to cleanly read. The formula makes the game more approachable, but it also makes the campaign less enjoyable for me over time. I think I was bored at about Mission 14, even though I hadn't had every upgrade, I hadn't had every weapon. I was like, okay, this is an easy loop. I always have enough ammo. The biggest issue, again, is the combat loop, because it feels less dynamic. In Doom Eternal, the game constantly pushed us across the entire arsenal because ammo, weak points, cooldowns, and enemy types demanded it. That could feel exhausting, but it also kept us engaged. It also kept me engaged. The Dark Ages has way more fodder. And once you fully upgrade a single gun with those fodder demon all around, you always have ammo, so you pretty much can just rely on that one gun. I could lean on my upgraded weapons for huge stretches of the campaign, and that reduced pressure to rotate weapons, manage ammo carefully, and constantly rethink my approach. The result is a game that looks massive, sounds brutal, and feels incredible in short bursts, but starts to flatten out across the full campaign. I barely used the Skull Crusher style weapons. I barely used the chain shot. Even when the game kept handing me more tools, I did not feel the same pressure to master the entire arsenal. Doom Eternal made it feel like a nightmare spreadsheet with demons attached, and you had to master it. You had to master every weapon, but every tool had a job. The Dark Ages gives you a wider battlefield, a heavier slayer, and it also gives you enough fodder and survivability that the weapon sandbox can pretty much shrink down to 2 or 3 weapons. And that's where the formula change really starts to hurt this game. The shield is the best new idea in the game. It gives the Dark Ages its identity, and when parries, shield throws, charges, and counters are flowing, the game absolutely works. That's why I had so many missions where I had less than 5 deaths. The problem is that the rest of the new systems don't evolve enough to carry the same weight. The Atlan mech is awesome, but it's awesome for the first time because it turns you into a walking siege engine. But after the initial spectacle, the mechanics are super simple. Same with the dragon sections. They have the same problem. They look cool, they give the campaign scale, and they help make the world feel bigger, but they never become deep enough to feel like a major gameplay pillar. I think about Halo Reach. Halo Reach had the flying mission right before George dies, and that was really well built out, like combat mechanics, but it didn't overstay its welcome. As the dragon sections, I think they kind of overstayed their welcome. If you had one dragon section in the game, that'd probably be enough. But we get multiple. Again, by mission 14, I was already starting to feel bored with extra objectives and side content. That is usually a bad sign in any game, but because Doom is at its best when combat itself keeps pulling you forward, the Dark Ages still has great moments, but the campaign has stretches where the spectacle is doing more work than the mechanics, and that makes the final verdict complicated. Doom: The Dark Ages is a good game. It has a strong identity, a killer aesthetic, and some of the best medieval war imagery the series has ever used. It makes the Slayer feel heavier, meaner, and more grounded. It also proves that Doom can move away from eternal speed and still function as Doom. But for me, it doesn't beat Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal. I would go back and play it in a few months, maybe a few years, but I don't know that I'd finish the entire campaign. Doom 2016, it has a clean loop. I could go back and play that whole campaign again. Doom Eternal, it's more demanding. It's a demanding combat puzzle. I could go back and play that full game. Doom: The Dark Ages right now, it has a strong fantasy war presentation, but the weakest long-term combat variety of the modern trilogy. So, is Doom: The Dark Ages harder than Doom Eternal? No, not even close. It's easier, heavier, less mechanically demanding. The challenge comes in spikes, while Doom Eternal's challenge lives in the entire combat loop. The Dark Ages trade speed for weight, complexity, and readability, and weapon juggling for shield-centered dominance. And that trade creates a game that is more accessible, more cinematic, but also leaves less replayability and less grip across the full game. After 121 deaths, my answer is simple. Doom: The Dark Ages is the easiest modern Doom, the coolest looking medieval power fantasy in the series, and the first time I felt a new formula becoming impressive before it became repetitive. But objectively speaking, which game is the hardest? Well, Doom 2016, I died 113 times. In Doom Eternal, I died 135 times. Making Doom Eternal the hardest game in the series, with Doom: The Dark Ages right in the middle. But I'm curious to see, what do you think? And if you've made it this far into the video, I'd greatly appreciate if you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can tune in for more videos in this series where I'm trying to determine, objectively speaking, how hard certain game series are in comparison to each other. I've already done Halo, I've already done BioShock, and I've even done the Legend of Spyro series. If that's a series that you enjoy, tune in for the next one.